You finally see the patterns clearly, and it's terrifying them. Not your anger, not your hurt, not your demands for them to change. Your clarity, your calm understanding of exactly what they're doing, why they're doing it, how the patterns work, what function the patterns serve. You're no longer confused by their hot and cold, no longer questioning yourself when they withdraw, no longer making excuses for their inconsistency, no longer believing their justifications for behavior that's actually just defended avoidance. You see it all, see them completely. See through every defense, every rationalization, every performance. And the seeing is stripping them of the cover their patterns have always provided. When you were naive, when you didn't understand avoidant attachment, when you thought their withdrawal was about you being too much or not enough, they had power. Power through your confusion. Power through your self-doubt. Power through your willingness to believe their framing of the relationship problems. Your naivety meant they could continue their patterns while blaming the patterns on you, on circumstances, on anything except their own defended incapacity. But you're not naive anymore. You've educated yourself. You understand attachment theory. You recognize their specific flavor of avoidance. You can predict their moves before they make them, and your education stripped their power completely. They're scared because you're no longer manipulable. Can't gaslight you into thinking you're too needy when you know your needs are normal. Can't convince you that you're too sensitive when you know you're responding appropriately to inconsistent treatment. Can't make you believe the relationship problems are your fault when you understand the problems are their patterns. Your clarity about what's actually happening means they can't control the narrative anymore, can't shake your perception to protect themselves, can't use your confusion to maintain their defended comfort. You see what's real. And what's real is threatening to them in ways your naive hurt never threatened them. They're also scared because you're no longer waiting for them to change. When you were naive, you had hope. Hope that if you just loved them enough, were patient enough, understanding enough, they'd eventually feel safe enough to open up. The hope kept you engaged, kept you trying, kept you available to their patterns while they stayed defended. But your education killed the hope. You know now that avoidance don't change without intensive therapy. Know that your love, patience, understanding don't create safety for someone whose nervous system is wired to experience intimacy as threat. Know that waiting for them to change without them doing therapeutic work is waiting for something that won't happen. Your lack of hope means you're no longer invested in their potential. You're responding to their reality, and their reality, without the hope filter softening it, is unacceptable. You're preparing to leave, or you've already left. And preparing to leave someone who thought you'd wait forever is scarier to them than anything you did while naive. The specific ways your no longer naive self is different and why each difference scares them. You've stopped pursuing when they withdraw. You used to chase, used to try to close the distance they created, used to reach out more when they pulled back. The pursuing allowed them to stay withdrawn while maintaining connection through your effort. But now you let withdrawal create actual distance. They pull back, you let them go. They create space. You fill it with your own life instead of with pursuit of them. The not pursuing is scary because it means their withdrawal has real consequences now, has real risk of loss. They can't use withdrawal as strategy to regulate their nervous system while keeping you available. Withdrawal now means actually being withdrawn from. And actually being withdrawn from means possibly losing you. The possibility is activating their attachment panic in ways your pursuing never activated it. You've stopped making excuses for their behavior. You used to rationalize. They're just busy. They're just stressed. They're just scared of commitment. They had difficult childhood. The excuses protected them from accountability. Let them continue patterns without facing that patterns are choices. But now you don't make excuses. You see their behavior as their behavior, their choices as their choices, their patterns as their patterns that they're responsible for, regardless of why the patterns exist. The lack of excuses is scary because it means they're being held accountable in ways they've never been held accountable. Can't hide behind justifications. Can't use their wounds as shields against responsibility. You see them clearly, and the clarity includes seeing that they're choosing their patterns every day, and the choosing is hurting you, and they're responsible for the hurt. You've stopped questioning yourself. You used to wonder if you were too needy, too sensitive, too demanding. The self-questioning was their power, made you the problem, made you responsible for fixing the relationship by fixing yourself. But now, you don't question yourself. You know your needs are normal. Know your expectations are reasonable. Know your reactions to their inconsistency are appropriate. The certainty in your own perception is scary to them because it means they can't make you doubt yourself, can't redirect focus to your supposed flaws, can't make the relationship problems about you needing to change. You're clear you're not the problem. They're the problem. Their patterns are the problem, and you being clear about that means the pressure to change is on them now. And pressure to change is exactly what they've organized their entire defended state around avoiding. You've stopped believing their words over their actions. You used to give weight to what they said. They said they cared. They said they wanted the relationship. They said they'd try harder. The words created hope, created willingness to stay, created belief that things would improve. But now you only believe their actions, and their actions are inconsistent, withdrawn, defended. The actions contradict the words, and you're believing the actions. The shift to believing actions over words is scary, because words were how they maintained the relationship while staying defended. Words cost nothing. Words create hope without requiring change. But if words don't work anymore, if you only believe actions, they'd have to actually change their behavior to maintain the relationship. And changing behavior is exactly what they're avoiding. Why they're more scared of your clarity than they were of your anger? Your anger when you were naive was manageable. They could handle anger, could dismiss it as you being emotional, could wait it out knowing your anger would fade and you'd come back, could use your anger as evidence you were too reactive, too unstable, too much. Your anger fit their narrative. Prove to them that the problem was your emotionality, not their patterns. Anger was something they had strategies for managing. Distance, dismissiveness, cold logic that made your anger seem unreasonable. The strategies worked, your anger would burn out, the relationship would continue. Their patterns would continue. But your clarity doesn't burn out, doesn't fade, doesn't make you look unreasonable. Clarity is calm, is factual, is observational, without being accusatory. You're not angry at them, you're just accurate about them. And accuracy is harder to defend against than anger. Can't dismiss clarity as emotion, can't wait it out because clarity doesn't exhaust itself. Can't make clarity seem unreasonable. Your clarity is mirror they can't distort, is showing them exactly what they're doing in ways they can't deny or reframe. And being seen accurately when you've built your life on being seen through distorted lens of others' confusion is exposure they can't defend against. Your clarity also scares them more because it proves you're stronger than they thought. Naive, you seemed weaker, seemed more dependent, seemed like someone who needed them more than they needed you. The perceived weakness gave them security, security that you'd stay, security that you'd tolerate the patterns, security that they had power. But clarity proves strength, proves you've done the work to educate yourself, proves you're capable of seeing reality without the comforting distortions naivety provided, proves you're strong enough to leave if they can't meet you. The strength is threatening, threatens their security that you'd always be available, threatens their power that came from your dependence, threatens the relationship because strong people with clarity don't stay in relationships that don't need them. The specific moments when you're no longer naive self makes them panic. They panic when they do their usual withdrawal and you don't pursue. They pulled back expecting you to chase like you always chased. But you don't chase. You just let them be distant. The not chasing creates void where your pursuit used to be. And the void is uncomfortable, is making them aware they're alone. Making them aware their strategy isn't working. Making them aware they might actually lose you through the withdrawal that used to just create temporary distance while you maintained connection through your effort. The panic is them realizing the rules changed. What used to work doesn't work. And what used to be safe strategy is now risky strategy that might cost them you. They panic when you calmly describe their pattern to them. Not accusing, not emotional, just observational. You withdraw when we get close. You become inconsistent when I express needs. You create distance when intimacy develops. The calm description is holding up mirror, is showing them their pattern in ways they can't deny because you're not being emotional, not being accusatory, not being unfair. You're just accurately describing what happens. An accurate description delivered calmly is more threatening than emotional accusation because emotional accusation can be dismissed. Calm accuracy can't. They're panicking because the pattern is visible, is named, is something they have to either defend or acknowledge. And defending it makes them look defensive. Acknowledging it requires accountability they don't want to take. They panic when you set boundary and maintain it. You say you need consistency or you're leaving. And they test the boundary expecting it to soften like your boundaries used to soften. But the boundary doesn't soften. You maintain it. The maintaining is new. Is different, is proving you meant what you said, and meaning what you say means they have to take your words seriously. Have to make actual choice, meet the boundary or lose you. The actual choice is panic-inducing because they're used to your boundaries being negotiable, being flexible, being more like preferences they could ignore. But this boundary is firm, is consequence-backed, is real, and real boundaries require real response, require them to change or leave. And both options are scary. What they're actually scared of underneath the surface fear. They're scared you're going to leave, and they'll regret losing you. While you were naive, while you didn't understand their patterns, there was safety in believing you'd always be there, that they could continue their defended patterns indefinitely and you'd continue trying indefinitely. But your education changed that. You understand now that avoidance rarely changes without therapy. Understand that waiting for change that's not happening is staying stuck. Understand that you deserve better than what they're capable of giving. The understanding is making you prepared to leave, already leaving. And them losing you while knowing they could have kept you if they'd been different is the regret they're trying to avoid. The regret would confirm they destroyed something good through their patterns, would confirm they're responsible, would confirm they're broken in ways that cost them people who matter. They're scared you're going to tell other people what you've learned. While you were naive, your explanations of the relationship problems were probably confused, emotional, focused on incidents rather than patterns. Easy for them to dismiss if others heard about it, easy to frame as you being too sensitive or you misunderstanding them. But now you understand patterns, can articulate clearly what's happening, can describe avoidant attachment in ways that are clinical, accurate, hard to dismiss. If you tell others, if you explain to friends or family what's actually happening, they'll lose the narrative control. Others will see them accurately too, will see the patterns, will see their responsibility, will maybe even recognize the patterns in their other relationships. The exposure to others is scary because being seen by one person is manageable. Being seen by multiple people is social consequence they can't control. They're scared you've stopped believing their potential and are only seeing their reality. While you were naive, you saw what they could be, saw the person underneath the defense, saw their capacity if only they felt safe enough to access it. The seeing their potential kept you hopeful, kept you patient, kept you invested. But now you see their reality. And their reality is defended person who's not accessing their potential, who's not doing the work to feel safe, who's not changing despite months or years of you being patient. The shift from seeing potential to seeing reality is scary, because reality is that they're defended, and staying defended and unlikely to change without intensive intervention. Reality doesn't inspire hope. Reality inspires leaving. And leaving based on reality rather than staying based on potential is losing you in a way they can't argue against, because you're not leaving who they could be. You're leaving who they actually are. They're also scared you're going to become the one who got away. The person who saw them completely and still loved them, but they lost through their patterns. The person who represents what could have been if they'd been different. The person they'll think about for years with regret. The person who proves they're capable of ruining good relationships through their defended incapacity. Becoming the one who got away to an avoidant is becoming permanent evidence of their dysfunction. Permanent reminder of what their patterns cost them. And being permanent evidence is being carried forever as the loss that could have been prevented if they'd just done the work. The fear of being the one who got away is fear of permanent regret, but fear of regret isn't strong enough to override fear of vulnerability required to change. So they're scared of the regret while still not doing the work that would prevent the regret. How they're trying to manage their fear and why it's making things worse. They're trying to minimize what you've learned, telling you that you're overthinking. That attachment theory is just pop psychology. That labeling them as avoidant is reductive. That you're using therapy speak to avoid addressing your own issues. The minimizing is defensive strategy is attempting to make your education seem less valid. If they can convince you that what you've learned isn't accurate or is overly simplistic, they can restore some of the confusion that gave them power. But the minimizing doesn't work. You've read too much, understand too well. Can see that their minimizing is exactly what the literature says avoidants do when confronted with their patterns. The minimizing is confirming what you learned rather than refuting it. Is making things worse because it's proving they're more committed to defense than to accountability. They're also trying to turn the focus on you. Suddenly they're very aware of your flaws, very verbal about ways you're not perfect, very focused on how you could be better. The focusing on you is deflection, is attempt to make the relationship problems mutual rather than their patterns. If they can make it about both of you needing to change, they can diffuse the pressure to change themselves. But you're not falling for it. You're willing to own your flaws, willing to work on yourself. But you're clear that your flaws don't cause their patterns. Their patterns exist independent of you, would exist with anyone. And knowing that means you're not accepting mutual blame for problems that are their defended state creating. The deflection is failing, is making things worse because it's proving they'll use any strategy to avoid accountability. Some are trying love bombing. Suddenly they're more available, more affectionate, more verbal about caring about you. The love bombing is panic response, is attempt to make you forget the patterns through overwhelming you with attention, is trying to prove they can be different while not actually addressing what makes them unable to sustain being different. But you recognize love bombing now. Recognize it's temporary. Recognize it's driven by fear of loss, not by developed capacity. Recognize it'll fade when the fear fades and the patterns will return. The recognition makes the love bombing ineffective. Makes it seem manipulative, even if it's not consciously manipulative. Makes things worse because now they're showing you they can be available when scared of losing you but won't maintain availability when feeling secure. The pattern is visible even in their attempts to prove the pattern doesn't exist. Why your education about their patterns is permanent power shift. Education can't be undone. You can't unknow what you know, can't unsee what you've seen, can't return to naive confusion now that you have clear understanding. The permanence of education means the power shift is permanent. They can't gaslight you back into confusion, can't manipulate you back into self-doubt, can't create the conditions that gave them power when you were naive. The power is yours now through knowledge. Through seeing them clearly, through understanding patterns better than they understand their own patterns. And power through knowledge is power they can't take back. Your education also shifted power because it shifted your attachment to outcome. When you were naive, you needed the relationship to work, needed them to change, needed to believe your love could heal them. The need made you desperate, made you willing to tolerate patterns, made you willing to sacrifice yourself. But education taught you that you can't heal someone who won't heal themselves. Taught you that staying with someone who won't change is choosing to suffer indefinitely. Taught you that leaving is option, is healthy option, is option that protects you. The teaching freed you from need for specific outcome. You're okay either way now. They change and you stay. They don't change and you leave. Both are acceptable. You're no longer desperate for them to be different. And not desperate is powerful. Desperate people can be controlled through their desperation. Not desperate people can't be controlled because they don't need you to be anything other than what you are. And if what you are isn't working for them, they leave. The education also shifted power by equalizing the understanding. When you were naive, they understood the dynamic better than you did. They knew they were withdrawing, knew they were creating distance, knew their patterns even if they couldn't articulate them. The knowing more gave them advantage. Let them control the dynamic through understanding it better than you understood it. But now you understand it as well as or better than they understand it. You can name the patterns, can predict them, can see function they serve. The equal or superior understanding removed their advantage. They can't rely on your confusion to maintain control. Can't use your not understanding to shape narrative in their favor. You see what they're doing as clearly as they see what they're doing. And equal vision is equal power. What happens when they realize they can't restore your naivety? Some panic harder, double down on strategies that aren't working, get more defensive, more dismissive, more aggressive about trying to regain control. The panic harder response is death spiral, is them recognizing they're losing you and responding by doing more of what's causing them to lose you. The more they defend, the more clearly you see the defense. The more they dismiss, the more clearly you see they're dismissive. The more they try to control, the more clearly you see they're controlling. The panic harder makes things worse faster. Accelerates the ending. Confirms for you that leaving is right choice, because if they can't respond to your clarity with anything except more defense, they're proving they're incapable of the vulnerability relationship requires. Others accept they've lost the control naivety gave them and try a new strategy. Honesty. They admit they're avoidant, admit they have patterns, admit they're scared. The honesty is refreshing. It's first time they're being real about what's actually happening. But honesty alone doesn't change capacity. Admitting you're avoidant doesn't develop ability to be present. Admitting you're scared doesn't create emotional availability. The honesty is necessary but insufficient, and you know that now. You recognize honesty as potential beginning, not a solution. If honesty leads to therapy, to active work on patterns, to sustained change over time, it matters. If honesty is just admission without action, it's just more words. More words you're not believing over actions. The honest admission without change doesn't restore the relationship. Just makes the ending slightly more mature, slightly more mutual in understanding, even if not mutual in choice. Some give up entirely. Recognize they can't make you naive again, can't restore the dynamic where your confusion gave them power, can't continue the relationship with you seeing them this clearly. So they end it. They leave first, before you leave them. The leaving first is attempt to restore some control, is them choosing the ending instead of being left. But the choosing to leave rather than do the work to change is final proof of what you already knew. They're more committed to their patterns than to you, more committed to their defended state than to relationship, more committed to avoiding vulnerability than to building something real. The proof is sad but clarifying, is confirming your education was accurate, is validating that leaving or being left is right outcome because they won't change and staying would be staying stuck. How your clarity is teaching them what your naivety never taught. Your clarity is teaching them their patterns have consequences they can't avoid. When you were naive, the consequences were soft. You'd be hurt, but you'd stay. You'd be confused, but you'd keep trying. You'd doubt yourself, but you'd still pursue. The soft consequences allowed them to maintain patterns because patterns weren't costing them anything permanent. But your clarity created hard consequences. You're not staying hurt. You're not trying anymore. You're not doubting yourself. You're leaving or you've already left. The hard consequences are teaching that patterns cost them people. Cost them specifically the people who see them clearly. Cost them the people strong enough to require better. The teaching is painful but necessary. Is only teaching that might drive change. Your clarity is also teaching them they're not as mysterious or complex as they thought. They thought their patterns were subtle, thought their defense was invisible, thought they were successfully hiding their avoidance. But you seeing them clearly is proving they're not subtle, not invisible, not successfully hidden. Their patterns are obvious to anyone who knows what to look for. And you know what to look for. The teaching is humbling, is showing them their textbook case of avoidant attachment, not complex, unique individual whose behavior is too nuanced to understand. Being seen as textbook is threatening to identity. They thought they were unique. They're just defended in very common way. And common means changeable through common therapeutic approaches if they pursue them. Your clarity is teaching them that understanding doesn't equal accepting. When you were naive and didn't understand, you still accepted them. Your love was unconditional in sense that you loved them despite not understanding them. But now you understand them completely and you're not accepting them. The understanding revealed that acceptance would be accepting patterns that hurt you, accepting defended state that prevents intimacy, accepting person who won't change. The teaching is, understanding makes me less willing to accept, not more. Because understanding shows me clearly what I'm accepting, and what I'm accepting is unacceptable. The teaching is probably counterintuitive to them. They might have thought that if you understood them better, you'd accept them more. But understanding led to clarity about why accepting them is accepting harm to yourself. And that clarity led to boundaries that look like rejection to them, but are actually self-protection by you. Why some avoidants will use your clarity as catalyst, while most won't. Small percentage will recognize your clarity as wake-up call they needed. Will recognize that you seeing them accurately is gift. Is honesty they've never received. Is someone loving them enough to educate themselves about their patterns, and then loving themselves enough to require the avoidant to address the patterns? The recognition will drive them to therapy, will drive them to admit they need help, will drive them to do the uncomfortable work of examining attachment wounds, developing emotional regulation, learning vulnerability. Your clarity becomes catalyst, becomes crisis, that motivates change. These rare avoidants will look back years later and recognize your clarity as turning point, as moment they couldn't hide anymore, and that inability to hide forced them to finally do the work. But most won't use the clarity as catalyst, will experience it only as threat, as exposure, as loss of control, will defend against the clarity instead of learning from it, will prioritize protecting their defended state, will lose you rather than do the work to keep you. The losing will be painful, but pain alone doesn't create change. Pain plus willingness plus therapeutic support creates change. Most have the pain, few have the willingness. Fewer still pursue the therapeutic support. So most will just hurt from losing you, will carry you as one who got away, will stay defended while becoming more cynical about relationships. Your clarity taught them, but they refused the teaching. Refused because receiving the teaching would require admitting they need to change. And admitting need to change is vulnerability their defended state exists to prevent. The difference between the ones who use clarity as catalyst and the ones who don't isn't intelligence or depth of feeling. Both groups can be intelligent, both groups can feel deeply. The difference is willingness to be uncomfortable. The ones who change recognize that discomfort of changing is less than discomfort of staying the same. The discomfort of therapy, of processing wounds, of learning new patterns is temporary, leads to growth, leads to capacity, leads to ability to have relationships that work. But discomfort of staying the same is permanent, is watching relationships fail repeatedly, is losing people who matter, is being alone with patterns that protect you from intimacy while making you suffer from lack of intimacy. The ones who change choose temporary discomfort with eventual reward. The ones who don't change choose permanent discomfort that feels safer because it's familiar. Your clarity forced the choice. What they chose revealed their capacity and their priorities. The permanent mark you leave by refusing to stay naive. You become the one who saw them completely. Not the distorted version others see, not the performance version they show the world, the actual them, patterns and all. Defenses and all, defended incapacity and all. Being completely seen is rare for the avoidant. Most people never get past the surface, never understand the patterns, never see through the defenses. You saw everything. And seeing everything, then choosing to require them to change or choosing to leave is different from not seeing and leaving out of confusion. Not seeing and leaving, they can tell themselves you didn't understand them. Seeing and leaving, they can't tell themselves anything except you understood them completely, and understanding them completely, you decided they weren't worth staying for without change. The being understood and left is mark that stays. You also become evidence that their patterns are visible to people who educate themselves. Before you, they could maintain belief that patterns were subtle, were their private internal experience, were successfully hidden from others. But you educated yourself and saw the patterns clearly, proved the patterns aren't hidden, are obvious to anyone with education about attachment. The proof is threatening to their identity, is revealing that they're not successfully masking their defended state. They're just surrounded by people who don't know what they're looking at. You knew what you were looking at, saw them clearly. And seeing clearly meant seeing person who's defended and staying defended and destroying relationships through staying defended. The evidence of visibility changes how they move through world, makes them more paranoid that others see it too, or alternatively makes them more defended to prevent anyone else seeing as clearly as you saw. You become permanent standard for what they lost by not changing. Every future relationship gets compared to what they had with you, not because you were perfect, but because you saw them completely and still loved them and gave them opportunity to change, and they didn't change and lost you. Every future person will be person who doesn't see them as completely, doesn't understand patterns as clearly, doesn't give them as clear opportunity to grow. Every future person will be lesser. Not because those people are actually lesser, but because those people won't represent the same clear choice. Change or lose someone who knows you completely. Most relationships end in confusion. Yours ended in clarity. And clear endings where they know exactly what they're losing and exactly why they're losing it are endings that stay. Our comparisons future relationships can't compete with. They'll carry you forever as person who could have been the one if only they'd been different. And carrying that is carrying permanent evidence of their own incapacity and the cost of that incapacity. How your education about their patterns changes every interaction moving forward. Every conversation is different now because you can see through their tactics in real time. When they use vague language to avoid commitment, you recognize it as defensive ambiguity. When they suddenly become busy after intimacy increased, you recognize it as deactivating strategy. When they bring up your flaws during moments when you're addressing their patterns, you recognize it as deflection. The real-time recognition means you can't be manipulated through these tactics anymore. Can't be redirected from the actual issue. Can't be made to doubt your perception in the moment. You're seeing the patterns as they happen. And the seeing means you're responding to what's actually happening, not to the false frame they're trying to create. Your responses have changed too. When they withdraw, you don't ask what's wrong or what you did. You recognize the withdrawal as their pattern, and you maintain your boundaries around it. When they deflect to your flaws, you don't get defensive or sidetracked. You acknowledge your flaws are a separate issue and return to addressing their patterns. When they make promises of change without action, you don't get hopeful. You wait for evidence of actual sustained change and respond to evidence, not words. The change responses are stripping them of their usual tools. Every tactic that used to work is failing. Every defensive maneuver is being seen and neutralized. They're experiencing what it's like to be in relationship with someone who can't be confused, can't be deflected, can't be made to doubt themselves. And experiencing that is showing them how much their patterns depended on your naivety to function. The change in interactions is also creating different emotional dynamic. When you were naive, you were often anxious, often hurt, often confused. Your emotional reactivity gave them feeling of being in control, made them feel like they had power, made the relationship feel manageable because your emotions were a problem to manage, not their patterns. But now you're calm, you're clear. You're not emotionally reactive to their patterns because you understand the patterns aren't about you. The calm is unsettling to them, makes them feel less powerful, makes them uncomfortable in ways your emotional reactivity never made them uncomfortable. Emotional reactivity they could dismiss. Calm clarity they can't dismiss, can only respond to honestly or defend against. And defending against calm clarity makes them look defensive in ways that defending against emotional reactivity didn't. The specific ways they're revealing their fear through their changed behavior. They're suddenly more interested when you pull back. Classic avoidant dynamic, but now you recognize it for what it is. When you were naive and pulled back, they'd pursue and you'd interpret it as them actually wanting you, would feel validated, would re-engage. But now when you pull back and they pursue, you recognize it as their attachment system activating in response to potential loss, not as genuine desire for closeness. You recognize that if you re-engage fully, they'll deactivate again. The pattern is visible. And visibility of pattern means you're not responding to the pursuit as if it's genuine interest in intimacy. You're maintaining your distance because you know the pursuit will fade when they feel secure again. The maintained distance despite their pursuit is creating more fear. They can't use pursuit to reel you back in. Can't restore the dynamic through showing interest. You're seeing through the pursuit to the pattern underneath. They're also being more vulnerable suddenly, but the vulnerability is strategic, not organic. They're sharing things they haven't shared, being more open about their feelings, showing more of themselves. But you can see it's timed, comes when they sense you're close to leaving, comes in response to you pulling back, comes as strategy to restore connection, not as organic opening up. When you were naive, you would have celebrated the vulnerability, would have seen it as breakthrough, would have believed things were changing. But now you recognize strategic vulnerability. Recognize it's being deployed as tactic, not emerging as growth. The recognition means you're not rewarding the strategic vulnerability with renewed commitment. You're observing it, noting it, and waiting to see if the vulnerability persists when they're not scared of losing you. Usually it doesn't, and the vulnerability disappearing when fear disappears confirms it was strategy, confirms your education was accurate, confirms they're still defended and still using defense even in their apparent openness. Some are becoming more critical of you suddenly, more vocal about your flaws, more focused on ways you're not meeting them. The increased criticism is fear manifesting as attack. Is them trying to create a situation where you're the problem, so they don't have to face that they're the problem? Is attempt to make you feel insecure, so you'll return to trying to prove your worth to them, instead of requiring them to prove their capacity. But you're not falling for it. You know your worth, know your flaws, don't cause their patterns. No criticism of you is deflection from accountability for them. The not falling for it means the criticism is failing as strategy, is making them look worse, not making you feel worse. Is confirming for you that they'll use any tool, including trying to damage your self-esteem, to avoid facing their patterns. And willingness to damage your self-esteem to avoid accountability is confirming your right to be leaving or have left. What your continued clarity reveals about your own growth. Your clarity proves you've developed secure attachment or are moving toward it. Secure people can see others clearly without being threatened by what they see, can hold boundaries without guilt, can recognize patterns without taking them personally, can love someone while recognizing loving them doesn't require accepting harm from them. The security in your clarity is evidence of your growth, evidence you're not dependent on them for your worth, not dependent on them changing for you to be okay, not dependent on the relationship working out for you to have valuable life. The security is beautiful, is freedom, is what you were moving toward while educating yourself about their patterns. You were becoming more yourself while understanding them more clearly. And more yourself is more secure, is more boundaried, is less manipulable. Your clarity also reveals you've learned to trust yourself over others' framing of reality. When you were naive, when they told you that you were too needy, or too sensitive, or too much, you believed them, doubted your perception, changed yourself, trying to be less of what they said was problem. But education taught you to trust your perception, taught you that people with patterns will frame reality to protect their patterns, taught you that someone calling you too needy might mean you have normal needs they can't meet, not that you're actually too needy. The learning to trust yourself over their framing is massive growth. Is reclaiming authority over your own experience, is refusing to let someone else's defended state define your reality. The self-trust is foundation of the boundaries you're now maintaining. The boundaries work because they're rooted in trust of your own perception, not in hope that their perception will change. Your clarity reveals you've accepted that you can't change anyone. When you were naive, you believed your love could heal them, believed your patience could make them feel safe, believed your understanding could help them open up. The beliefs kept you trying, kept you sacrificing, kept you thinking if you just did more or were better, they'd change. But education taught you that people change themselves or don't change. That external conditions can support change, but can't create change in someone unwilling to change. That avoidance specifically require intensive therapeutic intervention to change, and love alone doesn't provide that intervention. The acceptance that you can't change them freed you from the impossible task you'd assigned yourself, freed you from the responsibility for their growth, freed you to focus on yourself while letting them be responsible for themselves. The freedom is evident in your clarity. You're clear because you're not trying to manage their patterns anymore, just seeing them, and seeing without trying to fix is mature relating you couldn't do when naive. The ways they might try one final manipulation now that usual tactics failed. Some will attempt the grand gesture, the big romantic display, the impressive demonstration of how much they care. Flowers, letters, public declarations, plans for future they've never made before. The grand gesture is Hail Mary, is attempt to bypass your clarity through overwhelming emotion, through creating moments so significant you'll forget the patterns, through making such big demonstration that you'll believe this time is different. But you're not forgetting the patterns. You recognize grand gesture as fear response, as thing that will fade when fear fades, as substitute for the actual sustained change you require. You might acknowledge the gesture, might appreciate the effort, but you're not letting it change your boundaries, not letting it convince you that gesture equals capacity. The grand gesture falling flat, because you can see through it, is often final confirmation for them that they've lost the ability to manipulate you into staying. Others will try the crisis card. Suddenly something terrible is happening to them. Emergency that requires your support. Situation that makes it seem cruel to leave them right now. The crisis might be real or might be manufactured, but either way it's being used strategically. Is attempt to activate your care, your compassion, your sense of obligation, is banking on you being unable to maintain boundaries with someone in crisis. But you're maintaining boundaries even through crisis. You're recognizing that crisis doesn't create obligation for you to sacrifice your needs, that supporting someone through crisis doesn't mean staying in dysfunctional relationship with them. That crisis is actually time when their patterns are most likely to intensify, not improve. You might express care, might offer support in boundaried ways, but you're not using their crisis as reason to abandon your clarity about their patterns and your needs. The maintained boundaries through crisis is often enraging to them, makes them feel abandoned, makes them angry that you're choosing yourself over supporting them. But the anger is confirmation, is proving that they see your role as supporting them regardless of cost to you, and that seeing is exactly why your boundaries are necessary. Some will try the therapy promise. They'll promise to go to therapy, to work on their patterns, to change. The promise is strategic timing, comes when they realize they're losing you, comes as last attempt to make you stay. And when you were naive, therapy promise would have worked. Would have created hope, would have made you want to stay to see if they follow through. But you're not naive anymore. You know that therapy promised. Under pressure of losing you is therapy that might not happen. And even if it happens, therapy takes years to create change. And promise of future change doesn't address current patterns. You're responding to the therapy promise with, "That's good, you should do that for yourself, and I'm still maintaining my boundaries." The boundaries despite therapy promise is shocking to them. They thought therapy promise was trump card, was thing that would make you stay. But you're not staying for promise of future capacity, you're only staying for evidence of current capacity, and current capacity is lacking. So you're leaving despite the therapy promise. Or you're saying, do the therapy, develop the capacity, then we can revisit if both of us are available and interested at that point. The lack of guarantee that therapy will save the relationship is forcing them to face they need therapy for themselves, not a strategy to keep you. What they're learning about themselves through your refusal to return to naivety, they're learning they've been depending on others' confusion to maintain their patterns. Your clarity is showing them that their patterns only work with people who don't understand what's happening. That informed people, boundaried people, secure people won't tolerate their patterns. The learning is uncomfortable. It's showing them they've been selecting for partners who are naive, anxious, unsure of themselves because those partners will accommodate defended behavior. But accommodation isn't healthy relating, is enabling, and recognizing they need enabling to feel comfortable in relationships is recognizing their patterns are dependent on dysfunction, not just defended against. Intimacy, the recognition is threatening to identity. They thought they were protecting themselves. They're seeing they're requiring others to harm themselves to maintain the relationship. And requiring harm is being harmful even if unintentionally. They're learning that being seen accurately is more intimate than being seen adoringly. When you were naive, you saw them through hope-tinted lens, saw their potential, saw what you wanted to see. The adoring but inaccurate vision felt safer, felt less exposing. But your clear, accurate seeing is more intimate, because intimacy is being known, actually known, not idealized, not distorted, just known as you actually are, and being known as they actually are, defended, avoidant, pattern-driven, is more intimate than being adored for who they're not. The intimacy of accurate seeing is what they've been defending against, and experiencing it now, experiencing being truly seen, is showing them what they've been missing, what their patterns cost them, what's available if they could tolerate it. Some will recognize this as possibility. Most will defend against it even harder, because being accurately seen feels more threatening than being inaccurately adored. They're learning that their patterns have identifiable costs they can't avoid forever. When partners were naive, the costs were hidden. Partners blamed themselves. Partners thought they needed to change. Partners absorbed the costs of the patterns without the patterns being identified as source of costs. But your clarity made the costs visible. Made it clear that their patterns create specific outcomes. Partners leave, intimacy doesn't develop, relationships stay superficial, loneliness is permanent state punctuated by shallow connections. The visible costs are undeniable, are evidence their patterns aren't protecting them, are creating exactly what patterns are supposed to prevent: abandonment, isolation, pain. The learning is that defended state defending them from intimacy is simultaneously defending them from connection, and defending from connection is creating isolation that's worse than risk of intimacy would be. But knowing this and acting on this are different. Most know it now through your clarity. Few will act on it through pursuing change. Why your clarity is gift regardless of whether they can receive it. Your clarity gave them accurate mirror. Showed them exactly what they're doing, exactly how it affects others, exactly what it costs them. Most people don't get accurate mirrors. Get distorted reflections based on others' needs, projections, confusions. But you gave them truth. Truth about their patterns. Truth about impact. Truth about consequences. The truth is gift even if receiving it is painful, even if they can't use it. You gave them information they need to grow, if they ever become willing to grow. The information is planted, is waiting, is available when they're ready if they become ready. And giving truth is giving gift regardless of whether gift is received in moment it's given. Your clarity also gave them experience of what secure relating looks like. You maintained yourself while seeing them, maintained boundaries while caring about them, required them to show up while refusing to sacrifice yourself. The modeling is teaching, is showing them that healthy relationships involve two people maintaining themselves while building something together, not one person sacrificing while other person stays defended. The modeling might not create change now, but its template is example they've now experienced. Is contrast to dysfunctional relating they're used to, the template stays with them, becomes reference point, becomes what they know is possible even if they're not currently capable of it. The teaching through modeling is gift that keeps teaching even after you're gone. Your clarity is also gift to you, gift of living in integrity, gift of trusting yourself, gift of maintaining boundaries, Gift of choosing yourself when someone couldn't choose you. Gift of walking away from patterns that don't serve you instead of staying stuck hoping patterns will change. The gift to yourself is most important gift, is evidence you've grown, is evidence you value yourself, is evidence you're becoming more secure, more boundaried, more clear about what you will and won't accept. They're scared of your clarity because your clarity means losing you, but your clarity is actually you finding yourself. And finding yourself is worth losing someone who needs you to stay lost to feel comfortable with you. You're no longer naive, and they're scared. Good. The fear is appropriate response to losing someone they took for granted, to being seen accurately when they depended on being seen through distortion, to facing consequences when they expected accommodation. The fear might drive change, more likely won't. But the fear is consequence. Working is natural result of patterns meeting clarity. Is them experiencing what happens when someone educated enough to see them chooses themselves instead of choosing to tolerate patterns that don't serve them. Let them be scared. Your job isn't managing their fear. Your job is maintaining your clarity, maintaining your boundaries, maintaining yourself. They're scared. You're free. Both are exactly what should be happening.